welcome to the Utah Political Panel. We're going to be discussing a really important issue at hand. Just this past August, Biden finished pulling out U.S. troops out of Afghanistan, and it's caused a lot of unforeseen consequences. And so we had a great panel of experts tonight that we wanted to bring in to discuss this. And so we have Ashby Worth, and she will be discussing the article, "The U.S. Decision to Withdraw from Afghanistan is the Right One," from Brookings. And then we have Tylen Ritchie, who's using the article, "Biden Defends Messy U.S. Pullout from Afghanistan," from the BBC. And we have Alexis LeBaron, and she is doing "The U.S. War in Afghanistan, How It Started, How It Ended," from the New York Times. And I'm Hannah Nelson. I'll be doing "Not Our Tragedy, The Taliban Are Coming Back and America is Still Leaving," from the New Yorker. So let's jump right into it. Our first question, based on your fact checking, which of the news sources was most accurate, and how can you tell?
Yeah, so we decided that mine was the most accurate, and it was the most accurate because my article was very informative. I almost said opinionated. Informative, and it didn't really draw from like one side or the other side. It was just giving us facts, and so it came out that all of the facts were very accurate. And one of the facts that was stated a lot, but also was used from Biden, and he just stated in one of his speeches from the White House about Afghanistan, he said, "I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there is never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces." And then he goes on to say, "I made a commitment to the American people when I ran for president that I would bring America's military involvement in Afghanistan to an end. And while it's been hard and messy and yes, far from perfect, I've honored that commitment." And so this fact is in fact true, that this is what he said, and there's a lot of sources confirming that this is true.
Yeah, we also talked about the legitimacy of our 3 articles as well, that it was just so based squarely in bias, that they definitely had an ulterior motive trying to get across to their audience, whereas Tylen's was more informative. So I'd say that ours was probably more based in persuading their audience to think the way that they're thinking, or their news source wants their audience to think.
And that kind of leads perfectly right into the next question. If there was anything that was incorrect across multiple sources, and why would it be repeated? And what purpose would that be for? And just kind of with that, I think we were just discussing that a lot of the articles, there weren't a ton of facts that were necessarily false, but they were framed in a way that were trying to get you to take those facts and think something different than what the fact could say on its own. And for example, there was a quote from my article where it says, "Biden himself, normally the most empathetic of politicians, did not address the predictable and predicted human tragedy that his April decision to withdraw the roughly 3,500 U.S. troops remaining in Afghanistan has now unleashed." So 3,500 troops, that's probably true. And did Biden pull them out in April? Yes, he did start pulling them out in April, but Glasser takes this fact and she surrounds it with a bunch of other words. Empathetic politician, it's a predictable and a predicted human tragedy. And so she's saying Biden pulled these out and that's the wrong decision. When in reality, is that her decision to tell us whether that's right or wrong?
For sure, and I think that it's a really charged statement saying empathetic. It takes those different words and kind of alters them. But I mean, even then, we also have just facts that were wrong, and we couldn't find the truth. I think we didn't find a lot of truth in numbers. Numerically, things were just kind of different across the board, and there wasn't any congruence. And that makes it seem like, well, somebody's probably lying, but we don't know who. And so it makes all of our articles lose credibility because of that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, our next question is who were our various audiences for the articles we were analyzing, and how can you tell?
All right, so my article is from the Brookings Institution. They're a think tank organization based out of Washington, D.C. And although they claim to be central, a lot of sources say that they don't lean at all one way or the other. I think that they can't really control their authors, and it's very clear to me that the author for my specific article I was studying was very much on the Democrat side and trying to appeal to liberals, and you can definitely see that in how she's talking and the audience that she's appealing to.
My audience came from the BBC News, and they are stationed in Europe, and their audience is very directed to the younger generation. And so, of course, their articles are going to be easier to understand because they want their audience to be able to understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, my audience was kind of, once again, going into those charge statements we were talking about before, very clearly directed towards a middle-aged boomer type individual, sorry, who's also conservative. Even though the New York Times is predominantly a liberal democratic news source, it was very interesting to see how the different sourcing connected to not only their own article in the New York Times, but also to other authors who are very conservative and showing a lot of hate towards Biden during this time, and who predominantly throughout time has also shown a lack of interest and also a lot of hate and disinformation to their different audiences surrounding the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I found that my audience was also very interesting because the New Yorker is also like very left-leaning, very liberal. And in this article, Glasser wrote really scathing remarks about Biden and his decisions. But she also wrote a little bit of scathing remarks poking fun at Trump as well. So it's not necessarily a liberal article or a conservative article, but I found that she was trying to appeal to more of a younger generation. And the New Yorker, 43% of their viewers are from the Gen Z generation, which I thought was really interesting because for me personally, a couple of years ago, I was not interested in the news at all. But she's definitely leaning towards these people who are more progressive and maybe a little bit fed up with the different politics and maybe not happy with one party or the other. Well, thank you. Our next question, we also wanted to ask, how did the sources vary between the different articles?
So my sources in my article are very interesting because my author really only sourced other Brookings Institution articles or her own book that she was the author of. And so that just definitely skewed what the facts were and if they were true or not.
And my sources were very right and left. It was like a good mix, and it was because my article is very informative. So again, like it wasn't biased. It wasn't really going towards one side or the other side, and he used a lot of different sources in his article.
Yeah, and mine was actually very similar to Ashby's, where it linked a lot to other New York Times articles, which I thought was really interesting. Obviously, if you can increase viewership, like that's the goal, I guess, for their news source. But I do think that it impacted their credibility. And when there were other hyperlinks, like I was talking about before with audiences, it went to very similar authors. So you never know, like they could be linked in some way. And in those linkings, it had a lot of similar opinions between the different sources. So you could tell that they were probably, if not definitely, in collaboration with each other, and trying to put out and propose a certain view to their viewers.
In my article, there were also a few issues with sourcing that I found, and a couple of her biggest facts that she used to prove her argument, she has anonymous sources. So a member of the Biden administration or two experts who've had decades of Afghan history between them. And it's just very difficult because there's no way for me as a reader to verify whether her sources are truly accurate or not. But yeah, thank you. And then we wanted to ask, were there any of the articles where the same quote was used in different ways, and what purpose would it serve?
Yeah, so in my source, in my article, there's one quote that was used a lot, and I already shared it, but it was about how Biden stated a lot about how pulling out the troops was messy and how it was the right time to pull out troops. And as I was fact checking and researching, it just came up a lot in a lot of different articles.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that all of our articles have quoted Biden's speech on this matter in some way. And kind of similar to Tylen's quote, me and Alexis had in our articles a quote that said, none of this was a surprise despite Biden's embarrassing comment just last month that it was highly unlikely the Taliban would soon be overrunning everything and owning the whole country. And so Biden said that, and unlike in Tylen's article, Glasser takes his quote and tries to refute it and calls Biden's comment embarrassing and says, he may have said this, but that doesn't mean it was the right thing that he said.
That's super interesting, especially with the empathetic comment that was made earlier. Because I think that it takes Biden and says like, oh, he's trying to be, like, have that good connection with his audience, right? There's like, oh, like, dang it, like that happened, like that, too bad, like, you know? But instead, it's showing that he's just being, how do I put this, ignorant.
Yeah.
Honestly, of the situation of not only his troops, which as commander-in-chief you should understand, but also the needs of a whole country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. This Afghanistan-U.S. pullout has affected a lot of people, and we could probably analyze it for years and still not know everything that's going on, but our time is drawing a little short tonight, and so we wanted to finish off with one final question. What advice would you give to readers who are trying to figure out truth in the news?
I think that if I was just to dumb it down to 2 words, it's just question everything. Don't take anything for face value, because a lot of time you're going to be surrounded by sources that are supposed to be directed towards you and your target demographic. Whereas I know only my experience, right? I know my experience as an American white female who's 21. Whereas I don't understand the experience of someone who's in Africa or Afghanistan who is male, or etc., right? So I think that if we seek out those other sources and question what's being given to us, we take away the blinders that media is trying to put on our eyes.
Yeah, I love that. Going along with what Alexis said, I agree. I think there's a lot of things that get thrown at us, and I think there's a lot of things that come across as it's true, but it's not. And so I think you just have to be so aware of what you're reading and like what you're looking into, and like really making sure that it is truth. And we live in a time where we can't believe everything. And I think as we research and choose what we want to believe, I think we'll just be better off.
Going on with them, I think it's really important for us to look at the sources we're getting our information from and those sources where they're getting their information from, and just making sure everything is verifiable. I think that's huge for us and our media consumption. So,
and I think the advice I would give, I found in reading this article, it's very important to know that if someone is trying to change your opinion, if someone is trying to make you think in a certain way, you have to ask why, and you have to be aware of ulterior motives when it comes to deciphering truth. Well, that is all the time we have tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and please come and watch us next week, the Utah Political Panel. See you later.
Bye.